The wagon wheels churned up dust clouds that settled like ash on Colette Sullivan's skin as she sat bound in the back, her wrists raw from rope and her heart hollow as a dried riverbed. She was 20 years old, orphaned 3 months prior when fever took both her parents, and now her uncle had sold her like livestock to a traveling merchant for a pair of oxen strong enough to pull his plow through the unforgiving New Mexico soil. The year was 1878, and Santa Fe sprawled before them in the distance, adobe buildings shimmering in the August heat like a mirage she might never reach as a free woman. The merchant, a gap-toothed man named Farley who reeked of whiskey and tobacco, kept glancing back at her with eyes that made her skin crawl. He had plans to sell her again in Santa Fe to the highest bidder, whether that be as a servant, a saloon girl, or worse. Colette had heard the whispered stories about women who disappeared into the territories, never to be heard from again. She had tried to run the first night, but Farley had caught her within a quarter mile and tied her so tight her fingers had gone numb. Santa Fe's dusty streets welcomed them with the usual chaos of frontier life. Cowboys fresh off cattle drives stumbled from saloons, their pockets heavy with wages they would drink away before sunset. Merchants hawked their wares from storefronts painted in fading pastels. Women in calico dresses hurried past with baskets, averting their eyes from the bound girl in Farley's wagon. No one wanted to get involved in business that was not their own, not in a place where justice came from the barrel of a gun more often than from a judge's gavel. Farley pulled the wagon to a stop outside a large adobe building that served as a trading post and gathering place. He grabbed Colette roughly by the arm, dragging her down from the wagon. Her legs had cramped from sitting so long, and she stumbled, earning a curse from him. Inside, the air was cooler but thick with the smell of leather, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Men turned to look as Farley shoved her forward, and she felt their eyes cataloging her like she was a horse they might purchase. "Got me a fine worker here," Farley announced to the room. "Young, strong, pretty enough. Looking for the right price." Colette lifted her chin, refusing to let tears fall. Her mother had taught her dignity even in the face of degradation. Her dark blonde hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes blazed with defiance even as her body trembled. She wore a simple cotton dress, torn at the hem and stained from travel, but she held herself as straight as she could manage. From the back of the room, a man stood slowly from where he had been sitting at a poker table. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty shirt. His dark brown hair needed a trim, curling slightly at his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught Colette's attention, a clear, striking blue that seemed to see right through Farley's pretense to the cruelty beneath. "You are selling a woman?" the man asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Selling her labor," Farley corrected quickly, though his smirk suggested otherwise. "Perfectly legal. Her uncle sold her to me for debt, and now I'm looking to recoup my investment." The tall man walked forward, his boots striking the wooden floor with measured steps. He was around 25, Colette guessed, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the hard set of his jaw and the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He wore a gun belt slung low on his hips, the leather well worn and the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use what he carried. "What is your name?" he asked Colette directly, ignoring Farley entirely. "Colette Sullivan," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I did not ask for this. My uncle had no right." "Nobody asked you to speak," Farley snapped, raising his hand as if to strike her. The tall man's hand moved so fast it was barely a blur, catching Farley's wrist in an iron grip. Touch her again, and it will be the last thing you do." Farley jerked his arm back, rubbing his wrist and glaring. "You want to buy her or not, Silas?" So the tall man's name was Silas. Colette filed that information away, studying him more carefully now. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the other rough men in the room. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that did not need to boast or threaten unnecessarily. "How much?" Silas Sterling asked flatly. $200, Farley said quickly, sensing a buyer. "You paid 2 oxen, which are worth maybe $80 together. I will give you 100, and you will take it and leave Santa Fe before sundown." Farley's face reddened. "Now see here, $100, or I tell the sheriff that you are trafficking in human beings, which even in this territory will get you a rope around your neck or at least run out of town." Silas's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. The room had gone quiet, other men watching the confrontation with interest. Farley looked around, perhaps hoping for support, but found none. In the end, greed won over pride. "Fine, $100 and my best horse." Silas's eyes narrowed. "You are pushing your luck." "That is my price. $100 and a horse. Or you can watch me take her to the next town where someone will pay what she is worth." Colette watched Silas's face, saw the muscle in his jaw tick, saw the way his hands flexed at his sides. For a moment she thought he might just shoot Farley and be done with it. Instead, he nodded once, sharply. "I have a buckskin mare tied outside. She is the best horse I own, worth more than you deserve. Take her and the money and get out of my sight." The transaction took only minutes. Silas counted out gold coins into Farley's greedy palm, while another man went to examine the buckskin mare. Colette stood frozen, watching her fate being bartered with money and horseflesh. When the last coin changed hands, Farley cut the ropes from her wrists with a knife, not caring that the blade nicked her skin. Blood welled up in a thin line across her left wrist. "Pleasure doing business," Farley said with that awful smirk, tipping his hat mockingly at Colette. He left quickly, leading the beautiful buckskin mare that Colette could tell even from a glance was a magnificent animal. The horse had a proud head and intelligent eyes, clearly well-trained and well-loved. Silas had given up something valuable for her freedom, and she did not even know why. When Farley was gone, Silas turned to her. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just blue but had flecks of gray in them, like storm clouds. He pulled a bandana from his pocket and handed it to her. "For your wrist." Colette took it with shaking hands, wrapping the soft fabric around the cut. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me." "No man should own another person," Silas said simply, "and no woman should be sold like cattle." He gestured toward the door. "You are free to go. There is a boarding house 2 streets over, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. Tell her I sent you and that I will cover your room and board for a month. That should give you time to figure out what you want to do." Colette stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "You are just letting me go. You spent all that money and your horse, and you are simply setting me free." That was the point. Silas picked up his hat from the poker table and settled it on his head. "Unless you have somewhere else you need to be." "I have nowhere," Colette admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "My parents are dead, and my uncle made it clear I am not welcome to return. I have no money, no prospects, nothing but the clothes on my back." Something softened in Silas's expression. "Then go to Mrs. Chen's. Get cleaned up, get some rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about the future." "I cannot just take your charity," Colette protested, even as exhaustion pulled at her bones. "I have to repay you somehow. You do not owe me anything." Silas turned to leave, then paused. "But if you insist on repaying kindness, then someday when you see someone else in trouble, you help them." That is payment enough." He walked out into the blazing afternoon sun before Colette could respond, leaving her standing in the trading post surrounded by curious stares. She clutched his bandana to her bleeding wrist and tried to understand what had just happened. A stranger had traded his best horse and a significant sum of money to buy her freedom from a man who would have sold her into a life of misery. And then he had simply walked away, expecting nothing in return. Colette stepped out into the street, squinting against the bright light. She could see Silas's tall form already halfway down the block, heading toward what looked like a stable. Making a decision that surprised even herself, she hurried after him, her worn boots kicking up dust. "Wait," she called out. "Please wait." Silas stopped and turned, one eyebrow raised in question. "Mrs. Chen's is the other direction. I know." Colette caught up to him, slightly breathless. "But I cannot just walk away from you either. You gave up your horse for me. The least I can do is thank you properly and maybe understand why." Silas studied her for a long moment, and Colette had the sense he was seeing past her disheveled appearance to something deeper. Finally, he nodded. "I was about to get some supper at the restaurant next to the hotel. You are welcome to join me if you are hungry." Colette's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, reminding her that Farley had fed her nothing but stale bread and water for 3 days. "I would like that very much." The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of roasting meat wafting from the kitchen. The owner, a round Mexican woman with kind eyes, showed them to a corner table and brought water without being asked. Colette drank deeply, not realizing how parched she had been until the cool liquid touched her lips. "Order whatever you want," Silas said, settling into his chair with the ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Maria makes the best enchiladas this side of the Rio Grande." When the food came, Colette had to force herself to eat slowly, to not fall on the meal like a starving animal. The enchiladas were indeed delicious, spicy and rich, accompanied by beans and rice and warm tortillas. Silas ate steadily but without urgency, giving her space to satisfy her hunger. "Tell me about your horse," Colette said finally, when the edge of her appetite had been blunted. "The buckskin mare. She looked special." Silas's expression flickered with something that might have been regret, quickly masked. "Her name was Dancer. I raised her from a foal, trained her myself. She was smart, fast, and loyal, the best horse I ever owned." "I am so sorry," Colette said, and she meant it, "that you had to give her up for me." "I made a choice," Silas said firmly, "and I would make it again. Dancer will be fine with a new owner, probably better than she was with me, always dragging her across the territory on various jobs. But you, Miss Sullivan, you would not have been fine with Farley. So yes, I would make the same choice every time." "What kind of jobs?" Colette asked, curious about this man who had turned her world upside down with a single act of unexpected kindness. "I work as a hired hand on various ranches, help drive cattle, break horses, fix fences, whatever needs doing. I have been saving up to buy my own piece of land eventually, start a horse ranch. That is going to take longer now without Dancer to sell and with $100 less in my pocket, but I will get there eventually." Colette felt fresh guilt wash over her. "I have taken your dreams from you." "No," Silas said, leaning forward with intensity in those blue-gray eyes. "Farley was the one who tried to steal dreams, first yours and then trying to profit from your misery. What I did was simply refuse to let him succeed. My dreams are delayed, not destroyed. There is a difference." "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," Colette said softly. "Most men in your position would have either ignored what was happening or taken advantage of it themselves." "Most men are fools," Silas said bluntly. "My mother raised me to believe that how you treat people when they are at their lowest tells you everything you need to know about your own character. She died when I was 15, and my father drank himself to death a year later, but her lesson stuck. I am sorry for your losses, Colette said, recognizing grief in his words that matched her own. I lost my parents recently too, to fever. They were good people who deserved more years than they got. Seems we have something in common then, Silas observed. Both orphaned, both trying to make our way in a hard world. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Colette would have expected given the circumstances of their meeting. She learned that Silas was 26, had been working as a cowboy since he was 16, and had a reputation for being fair but tough. He had never married, never even come close, too focused on saving money and building toward a future he could see clearly in his mind's eye. In turn, Colette told him about growing up on a small farm outside of Albuquerque, about learning to read from her mother who had been a schoolteacher before marriage, about her father's skill with carpentry, and how he had built their whole house with his own hands. She told him about the fever that had swept through, killing both her parents within a week of each other, and about her uncle's cold assessment that she was now his burden to dispose of as he saw fit. Your uncle is a coward and a criminal, Silas said flatly when she finished. What he did was wrong, no matter how he tried to justify it. I know, Colette said, but knowing that does not change what happened. No, Silas agreed, but it does change what happens next. You get to decide your own future now, Miss Sullivan. That is worth something. When they finally left the restaurant, the sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the adobe buildings in shades of orange and gold. Silas walked Colette to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, a neat two-story structure with a flower garden in front that seemed impossibly green in the arid climate. Mrs. Chen herself answered the door, a tiny Chinese woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Silas Sterling, she said in crisp English with only a faint accent. I have not seen you in months. What brings you to my door? This is Miss Colette Sullivan, Silas said. She is in need of room and board for a month, and I am standing as her guarantor for payment. Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes took in Colette's disheveled state, the bandage on her wrist, the exhaustion that surely showed on her face. Whatever she saw there made her nod briskly. Come in, child. You look like you need a hot bath and a soft bed more than you need questions. Thank you, Colette said, her voice tight with emotion. Thank you so much. Mrs. Chen waved away her thanks. Any friend of Silas's is welcome here. Come, I will show you to your room. Colette turned back to Silas, who stood on the porch with his hat in his hands. In the fading light, he looked younger somehow, less weathered. I do not know how to thank you properly, she said. You have given me back my life today. Live it well, Silas said simply. That is all the thanks I need. He settled his hat back on his head and turned to go. Will I see you again? Colette asked, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. Silas paused, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. I will be in Santa Fe for a few more days, finishing up some business. After that, I have a job lined up at a ranch about 30 miles south. But yes, I expect you will see me again, Miss Sullivan. He walked away into the gathering darkness, and Colette watched until he disappeared around a corner. Only then did she turn and follow Mrs. Chen inside, toward the promise of hot water and clean sheets, and one night where she would not have to sleep in fear. The room Mrs. Chen showed her to was small but spotlessly clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser with a wash basin and pitcher, and a single window that looked out over the street. After Mrs. Chen left to heat water for a bath, Colette sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for the first time since her parents had died. She cried for them, for the life she had lost, for the terror of the past 3 days, and finally, strangely, for the beautiful buckskin mare that a kind stranger had traded away to save a woman he did not even know. The next morning, Colette woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she forgot where she was, panic rising until memory returned. She was safe. She was free, thanks to Silas Sterling. Mrs. Chen had left a simple blue dress on the dresser, clearly belonging to someone else but clean and only slightly too large. Colette put it on gratefully, braided her hair as best she could without a mirror, and made her way downstairs to a dining room where several other boarders were already eating breakfast. "Sit, eat," Mrs. Chen commanded, pointing to an empty chair. "You are far too thin." The food was plentiful and delicious, and Colette ate more than she had in weeks. The other boarders, a mix of cowboys, merchants, and one severe-looking woman who turned out to be a traveling nurse, were polite but not intrusive. In a place like Santa Fe, people learned not to ask too many questions about each other's pasts. After breakfast, Mrs. Chen pulled Colette aside. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "I am getting older and this house is getting harder to manage alone. I could use help with the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. In exchange, I will provide your room, board, and a small wage. It is not much, but it is honest work." "I would be honored," Colette said immediately, "and grateful beyond words." "Good." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "You can start by helping me change the linens in the rooms upstairs. The cattle buyers are checking out this morning, and new guests will arrive this afternoon." Colette threw herself into the work with relief. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose again. She changed linens, swept floors, beat rugs, and helped Mrs. Chen prepare lunch for the boarders. The work was hard but satisfying, and Mrs. Chen was a patient teacher who showed her the most efficient ways to accomplish each task. Over the next 3 days, Colette fell into a rhythm at the boarding house. She woke early, helped prepare breakfast, cleaned rooms, did laundry in the big copper tub out back, and helped with supper preparations. In the evenings, she would sit on the porch and watch Santa Fe go about its business, the streets slowly emptying as darkness fell and decent people went home. She thought about Silas Sterling often, wondered where he was and what he was doing. Part of her hoped he would stop by, while another part felt it might be better if he did not. She owed him a debt she could never truly repay, and that knowledge sat uncomfortably in her chest. She was not accustomed to being beholden to anyone, especially not to a man she barely knew. On the 4th morning, she was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard Mrs. Chen call her name. "Colette, you have a visitor." Her heart jumped inexplicably. She smoothed down her dress, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and walked around to the front of the house. Silas stood on the porch, looking much the same as he had 4 days ago, though he had clearly shaved recently and his shirt was clean. "Good morning, Miss Sullivan," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all," Colette said, aware of Mrs. Chen watching from the doorway with undisguised interest. "Would you like to sit? I can bring some lemonade." "That would be nice, thank you." They settled into the porch chairs, and Colette fetched 2 glasses of the lemonade Mrs. Chen made every morning from precious lemons she ordered from California. Silas accepted his gratefully and took a long drink. "I came to tell you I am heading out tomorrow," he said. "The ranch job I mentioned starts next week, and I want to give myself time to get there and settle in." "I see." Colette tried to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. "Well, I hope it goes well for you. Also, I wanted to check on how you are doing. Mrs. Chen's is a good place, but if you need anything, or if you have trouble of any kind, you should know that Sheriff Martinez is an honest man." You can go to him if you need help. Mrs. Chen has been wonderful, Colette said. She has given me work in exchange for room and board. I am very lucky. You are resilient, Silas corrected. Luck is finding a silver dollar in the street. What you are doing is building a new life from nothing. That takes strength. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping lemonade and watching a freight wagon lumber past. Colette searched for the right words, wanting to express what she felt but not sure how to begin. I have been thinking about what you did, she said finally. Giving up your horse and your money for a stranger. I want you to know that I will not waste this chance you have given me. I will make something of myself, make a life that honors your sacrifice. It was not a sacrifice, Silas said, turning to look at her directly. It was an investment in basic human decency. And I have no doubt you will make something of yourself, Miss Sullivan. You have that look about you. What look? The look of someone who has been knocked down but will not stay down. I recognize it because I see it in my own mirror every morning. Colette smiled despite herself. Is that a compliment or a warning? Maybe both. Silas smiled back, and the expression transformed his face, made him look younger and less careworn. Stubbornness can be a virtue or a vice, depending on how you use it. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from the mundane to the philosophical. Silas told her about the ranch where he would be working, a sprawling operation that ran several thousand head of cattle and prided itself on its well-trained horses. The owner, a former Confederate officer named Clayton Reeves, had a reputation for being fair but demanding. Silas would be working primarily with the horses, breaking and training them for ranch work and sale. It sounds like exactly what you want to be doing, Colette observed. Working toward your dream of your own horse ranch. It is a step in the right direction, Silas agreed. Though without Dancer, I am starting a bit further back than I would like, but I will get there eventually. Guilt gnawed at Colette again, but she pushed it down. Silas had made his choice with open eyes, and dwelling on it would only insult his decision. When Silas finally rose to leave, Colette stood as well, reluctant to see him go. "Will you write?" she asked impulsively. "I would like to know how you are doing, and I could tell you how things are going here." Silas looked surprised but pleased. "I am not much of a letter writer, but I could try. Mrs. Chen would hold mail for you. I am sure she would. Then yes, I will write." Silas held out his hand, and Colette took it, feeling the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. "Take care of yourself, Miss Sullivan. You too, Mr. Sterling, and thank you again for everything." She watched him walk away down the dusty street, his long stride eating up ground quickly. She stood on the porch until he turned a corner and vanished from sight, then went back inside to find Mrs. Chen waiting with a knowing look. "That is a good man," Mrs. Chen said simply, "and rare. If you are smart, you will not let him slip away." "He just bought my freedom," Colette protested. "I cannot immediately throw myself at him like some desperate woman." "Who said anything about throwing yourself?" Mrs. Chen said archly. "But writing letters, staying in touch, seeing where things might lead, that is not desperation. That is common sense." Colette could not argue with that logic, so she did not try. Instead, she returned to her laundry, but her mind stayed with a tall cowboy heading south to a ranch, riding a horse that was not his beloved Dancer. The weeks turned into months, and summer faded into autumn. The heat that had made Santa Fe feel like an oven cooled to pleasant warmth during the day and chill at night. Colette's hands, soft from her former life, developed calluses from work. She learned to cook Mrs. Chen's recipes, to haggle with merchants at the market, to manage the boarding house books when Mrs. Chen's eyes grew tired. And she exchanged letters with Silas Sterling. His first letter arrived 3 weeks after he left, written in a strong, slightly cramped hand that suggested a man unaccustomed to putting pen to paper. He wrote about the ranch, about the horses he was training, about sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He wrote about missing his buckskin mare more than he had expected, but also about a promising young gelding he was working with that showed real intelligence and heart. Colette wrote back, telling him about life at the boarding house, about the colorful characters who passed through, about Santa Fe's growing pains as the railroad brought more people and commerce. She told him about learning to make Mrs. Chen's famous egg rolls, about the autumn festival in the plaza, about the first time she laughed so hard she cried at something one of the other boarders said at dinner. The letters became more frequent, more personal. Silas wrote about his childhood, about growing up with a mother who insisted on education despite frontier hardships, about his father's descent into alcoholic despair after she died. Colette wrote about her parents' love story, about dreams she had harbored of perhaps becoming a teacher like her mother, about the strange grief that came in waves when she least expected it. Winter arrived, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that dusted Santa Fe's adobe buildings with white. Colette's birthday came and went quietly, marking her 21st year. She had been free for 4 months, and it still sometimes felt like a dream from which she might wake to find herself back in Farley's wagon. Then, on a cold December morning, Silas Sterling rode into Santa Fe on a rangy bay gelding, his coat collar turned up against the wind and his hat pulled low. Colette was sweeping the porch when she saw him, and the broom clattered to the wooden boards as shock and joy surged through her in equal measure. "Mr. Sterling," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "I was not expecting you." Silas swung down from his horse, moving a bit stiffly as if he had been in the saddle for a long time. "I got some time off for the holidays," he said, "and I thought I would come see how Santa Fe looks in winter." "It looks cold," Colette said, laughing. "Come inside before you freeze. Mrs. Chen will want to see you, and there is coffee fresh made." Inside the warm boarding house, Mrs. Chen indeed fussed over Silas, serving him coffee and fresh baked bread with butter and honey. Silas ate gratefully, and Colette could not stop stealing glances at him. 4 months had changed him subtly. He looked leaner, more weathered, with new lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind. But his eyes were the same, that clear blue-gray that seemed to see right through to her soul. "You look well," Silas said to her when Mrs. Chen bustled off to check on something in the kitchen. "Life here agrees with you." "It does," Colette agreed. "I have been happy here, happier than I thought possible after everything that happened. Your letters helped too. They reminded me that there are good people in the world." "Your letters helped me too," Silas said quietly. "The work is hard and sometimes lonely. Having someone to write to, someone who understands what it is like to rebuild a life from scratch, that matters more than you might think." They looked at each other across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Colette felt her heart beat faster, felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold outside. She had told herself for months that gratitude was not the same as affection, that just because Silas had saved her did not mean she should confuse those feelings with something deeper. But looking at him now, she knew she had been lying to herself. "How long can you stay?" she asked. "A week, maybe a bit more. I need to be back by the new year." Silas paused, then added, "I was hoping you might show me around Santa Fe properly. In my letters you made it sound like there is more to see than saloons and trading posts." "There is," Colette said, her smile widening. "And I would be happy to show you." Over the next week, Colette and Silas explored Santa Fe together. She took him to the old plaza where Spanish governors had once ruled. showed him the cathedral with its towering spires, walked with him through the market where vendors sold everything from silver jewelry to hand-woven blankets. They ate at small restaurants tucked down side streets, tried foods neither of them had tasted before, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. They attended a Christmas Eve service at the cathedral, the interior lit by hundreds of candles that made the adobe walls glow gold. Colette had never been particularly religious, but standing next to Silas in that ancient space, hearing the choir sing in Latin and Spanish, she felt something shift in her chest. She glanced at him and found him already looking at her, his expression soft in the candlelight. After the service, they walked back toward the boarding house slowly, neither of them eager to end the evening. Snow had begun to fall, fat flakes that melted on their coats and caught in Colette's hair. "I have something for you," Silas said suddenly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Colette unwrapped it carefully to find a pair of leather gloves, soft and supple, clearly made by skilled hands. "They are beautiful," she breathed. "But you should not have spent money on me. You are always talking in your letters about how cold your hands get doing laundry in winter," Silas said. "I thought these might help. One of the ranch hands' wives makes them. She does beautiful work. Thank you." Colette pulled on the gloves, finding they fit perfectly. "I love them." She had not gotten him anything, had not expected to see him, and now felt foolish and unprepared. "I can see you thinking you should have gotten me something," Silas said with a smile. "Do not. The pleasure of your company this week is gift enough." They stood there in the falling snow, and Colette felt the moment stretch between them, full of possibility and unspoken words. She wanted him to kiss her, realized with a start that she had wanted that for months, that maybe she had wanted it since the day he traded his best horse for her freedom. But Silas simply smiled, touched the brim of his hat, and said good night, leaving her standing on the porch with new gloves on her hands and confusion in her heart. The next few days passed too quickly. Silas stayed at a small hotel near the boarding house, but he spent most of his waking hours with Colette. They rode horses borrowed from a local stable out to see the mountains in winter, packed with snow that sparkled in the weak sunlight. They attended a New Year's Eve celebration in the plaza where musicians played and people danced, and Silas proved surprisingly graceful for such a large man, guiding her through reels and waltzes with confident hands. When midnight struck, the crowd erupted in cheers and embraces. Colette turned to Silas, finding him closer than she expected, his hand still on her waist from the last dance. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, breath mingling in the cold air, and then Silas leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, his lips warm against hers. Colette answered by rising on her toes, by bringing her gloved hands up to frame his face, by kissing him back with all the feelings she had been trying to deny for months. Around them, the celebration continued, but they were in their own world, discovering something that had been building since the moment he had refused to let Farley strike her. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I should have asked permission first," he said, his voice rough. "That was ungentlemanly of me. If you had asked, I would have said yes," Colette whispered back. "I have wanted you to kiss me for a while now." "Good," Silas said, "because I have wanted to kiss you since you told me your name in that trading post, but I did not want you to feel obligated because of what I did. I needed you to want this for the right reasons." "I want this," Colette said firmly. "I want you. Not because you saved me, though I will always be grateful for that, but because you are kind and strong and honest, because you write me letters about the stars and missing your horse." because you gave up what you loved most to help a stranger, and because I do not think I can imagine my life any more without you in it." Silas kissed her again, longer and deeper this time, and Colette felt something inside her that had been clenched tight since her parents' death finally began to unfurl. Here in this man's arms, in this frontier town, she had found something she had thought lost forever, the possibility of home. When Silas had to return to the ranch in early January, they parted with promises and plans. He would work through the spring and summer, saving every penny he could. In the fall, he would return to Santa Fe, and if Colette was willing, they would marry. She would come with him to the ranch, or they would find someplace together, build that horse ranch he dreamed about, create a life side by side. "I know it is not conventional, us courting mostly by letter," Silas said as he prepared to ride out. "And I know some would say we are moving too fast. But I am 26 years old, and I know my own mind. I love you, Colette Sullivan. I think I have loved you since you lifted your chin in that trading post and refused to let that bastard see you broken." "I love you too," Colette said, the words coming easily because they were true. "And I do not care what is conventional. Come back to me, Silas Sterling. That is all I ask." He kissed her one more time, then mounted his bay gelding and rode south, turning once to wave before disappearing into the winter landscape. Colette stood on the porch long after he was gone, her hand pressed to her lips, already counting the days until autumn. Spring came to Santa Fe with wildflowers blooming in impossible profusion across the high desert. Colette threw herself into work at the boarding house, but she also began preparing for her future. Mrs. Chen, understanding and supportive, began teaching her more complex skills like bookkeeping and managing suppliers, knowing that Colette would need these abilities when she ran her own household. The letters from Silas came faithfully, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. He wrote about the spring roundup, about new foals being born, about a particularly difficult stallion he was working with that finally began to trust him. He wrote about saving money, about scouting possible land for their future ranch, about dreaming of the day when he would ride back to Santa Fe and make her his wife. Colette wrote back with equal faithfulness, telling him about her days, about the gardens she helped Mrs. Chen plant, about reading every book she could find about horses and ranching, preparing herself for the life they would build together. She wrote about missing him, about the way her heart jumped every time a rider came down the street, hoping irrationally it might be him even though she knew he could not leave the ranch during the busy season. Summer brought heat that shimmered off adobe walls and made the air thick enough to taste. Colette developed a golden tan from working in the garden, and she felt stronger than she ever had, her body toned from constant work. She was no longer the girl who had been sold for a pair of oxen. She was a woman with purpose, with plans, with love. In late July, tragedy struck the ranch where Silas worked. A letter came from someone else, a ranch hand named Tom whose handwriting was barely legible. Colette's hands shook as she read about a flash flood that had caught several cowboys by surprise, about Silas being swept away while trying to save some of the horses, about how they had found him downstream, battered and unconscious. He was alive, the letter said, but badly injured. He had a broken leg, cracked ribs, and a head wound that had left him delirious with fever. The ranch doctor was doing what he could, but it would be a long recovery if Silas survived at all. Colette did not hesitate. She packed a small bag, took the money she had saved, and caught the next stage heading south. Mrs. Chen hugged her fiercely and pressed more money into her hands. "Bring him back when he is well enough to travel," she said. "You both belong here with family." The journey took 2 agonizing days over rough roads that jarred every bone in Colette's body. She arrived at the Reeves ranch exhausted and terrified, demanding to be taken to Silas immediately. The ranch owner, Clayton Reeves, was a stern man with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by decades of frontier life, but his eyes were kind as he escorted Colette to the small cabin where Silas was recovering. "He has been asking for you," Reeves said quietly. "The fever makes him confused sometimes, but your name is the one he calls most often." Colette entered the dim cabin to find Silas lying on a narrow bed, his face pale beneath his tan, his legs splinted and his torso wrapped in bandages. A woman sat beside him, wiping his face with a damp cloth. She looked up as Colette entered. "You must be Miss Sullivan," the woman said. "I am Grace Reeves, Clayton's wife. Silas has told us all about you." Colette barely heard her, her attention fixed on Silas. She moved to the bedside, taking his hand carefully. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and labored. "Silas," she said softly, "it is me, it is Colette, I am here." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing. "Colette," his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Are you real or am I dreaming again?" "I am real." She brought his hand to her cheek, let him feel her warmth. "I came as soon as I heard. You are going to be all right, do you hear me? You are going to get better because I will not allow otherwise." A ghost of a smile crossed his cracked lips. "Stubborn woman." "You said it was a virtue," Colette reminded him, blinking back tears. "So I am using my stubbornness for good. You are going to rest and heal, and then we are going back to Santa Fe together." "My work here," Silas started to protest weakly. "Is done for now," Clayton Reeves interrupted from the doorway. "You nearly died saving my horses, Sterling. The least I can do is give you time to recover properly. When you are well enough to ride again, we will talk about the future." Over the next weeks, Colette barely left Silas's side. Grace Reeves showed her how to change bandages, how to prepare poultices for wounds, how to coax broth and medicine into a man too weak to feed himself. Slowly, painfully, Silas began to improve. The fever broke after 5 terrible days. The head wound closed and began to heal. His ribs knitted together, though they pained him when he moved too quickly. The broken leg was the worst injury, shattered in multiple places when a log had struck him in the flood. The doctor was pessimistic about whether Silas would ever walk without a limp, whether he would be able to do the physical work of a cowboy again. But Silas, with his characteristic stubbornness, refused to accept that prognosis. "I will heal," he told Colette one evening as she helped him sit up to eat. "I will walk again properly, ride again, work again. I have too much to live for to accept less." "You do not have to prove anything," Colette said gently. "If you need to find different work, we will manage. What matters is that you are alive." "It matters to me," Silas said fiercely. "I will not be a burden to you. I will not be a broken man who cannot provide for his wife." "Then I guess it is a good thing I am not just a pretty face," Colette said tartly. "I can work, Silas. I can contribute. We will be partners, equals. That is what I want, not some fantasy where you do everything while I sit idly by." Silas looked at her for a long moment, then laughed, though it clearly hurt his ribs. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "You traded your best horse," Colette reminded him with a smile. "Best investment you ever made." By mid-September, Silas was able to walk with crutches, though his leg was still splinted and would be for several more weeks. Clayton Reeves called them both into his office one morning, his expression serious. "I have been thinking about your situation," he said without preamble. "You are a good man, Sterling, and the best horse trainer I have seen. I do not want to lose you. So here is what I propose. I have a line cabin about 10 miles from here, near a creek with good water and grazing. It is on my land, but I barely use it. You and your bride can live there rent-free. You work with my horses as you are able, training and breaking them, and I will pay you a fair wage plus a percentage of sale prices. When you have saved enough, I will sell you that piece of land at a reasonable price, and you can start your horse ranch proper." Silas and Colette looked at each other, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. "That is incredibly generous," Silas said. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved my livestock at risk of your own life," Reeves said bluntly. "And because good men are hard to find. Also, my wife likes Miss Sullivan and says she has a good head on her shoulders. Grace wants her to stay, and I learned years ago not to argue with Grace when she has made up her mind about something." "We accept," Colette said before Silas could overthink it. "And thank you, Mr. Reeves. You will not regret it." They were married in late September in the small church that served the ranch and surrounding homesteads. Grace Reeves stood as Colette's witness, and Tom, the ranch hand who had written the letter, stood for Silas. Colette wore a simple dress of cream-colored muslin that Grace had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Silas stood beside her on his crutches, his legs still splinted but healing, his face full of joy that made him handsome despite the new scars he bore. "I, Silas Sterling, take you, Colette Sullivan, to be my wife," he said clearly, his voice strong despite everything he had been through. "I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to build a life with you based on respect, partnership, and honesty. I promise to never take for granted the gift you are, and to spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." Colette's voice shook with emotion as she made her own vows, promising to love and cherish, to build a future together, to face whatever challenges came as partners united. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Silas kissed her with his whole heart, and the small congregation erupted in applause. The line cabin Reeves had offered them was small but sturdy, built of logs with a stone fireplace and 2 rooms. It sat in a meadow with the creek Reeves had mentioned running nearby, cottonwood trees providing shade and mountains rising in the distance. To Colette, it looked like paradise. They moved in with few possessions but high hopes. Colette set about making the cabin into a home, sewing curtains for the windows, hanging herbs to dry from the rafters, planting a vegetable garden in the rich soil near the creek. Silas, still recovering, began working with horses as he was able, at first just teaching from a chair while others did the physical work, then gradually taking on more as his legs strengthened. Their first winter together was hard but happy. Snow fell deep, and they spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking about their days, their dreams, their growing plans for the future. Silas's leg healed slowly but surely, and by spring he was walking with only a slight limp, able to ride again, though he had to be careful mounting and dismounting. The work with the horses went well. Silas had a gift for understanding equine psychology, for knowing when to push and when to gentle, when to be firm and when to be patient. Word spread, and soon ranchers from surrounding areas were bringing horses to him for training, willing to pay premium prices for his expertise. Colette kept the books, managed their finances, and began breeding chickens and selling eggs to supplement their income. In the summer, Colette discovered she was pregnant. She told Silas one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set behind the mountains. He pulled her close, kissed her temple, and whispered thank you against her hair as if she had given him the greatest gift imaginable. Their daughter was born in early spring, arriving with the same wildflowers that had bloomed the year Colette came to the ranch. They named her Sarah, after Silas's mother, and she had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Silas wept when he first held her, this tiny creature who represented everything he had fought for, everything they had built together. 2 years later, their son arrived, a strapping boy they named Charles after Colette's father. He was followed 3 years after by another daughter, Margaret, who proved to be as horse-crazy as her father and spent every possible moment in the stables. The years passed in a blur of work and laughter, challenges and triumphs. Silas finally bought the land from Clayton Reeves, and Sterling Horse Ranch became official. They expanded slowly but steadily, building a larger barn, adding corrals, buying their own breeding stock. The ranch gained a reputation for producing some of the finest horses in New Mexico, and buyers came from as far away as Texas and Colorado. Through it all, Silas and Colette remained partners in the truest sense. They worked side by side, made decisions together, shared their victories, and consoled each other through setbacks. The love that had begun in a trading post in Santa Fe, born from an act of uncommon kindness, only deepened with time and shared experience. They went back to Santa Fe often over the years, always stopping at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The old woman, growing frailer with age but still sharp as ever, delighted in their visits and especially in their children. She never stopped reminding them that she had known from the first that they belonged together. On their 10th anniversary, Silas gave Colette a gift that made her cry. It was a painting of a buckskin mare, beautifully rendered by a traveling artist he had commissioned. "Dancer," he said simply. "I wanted you to see her, to understand what I gave up that day. And I wanted to tell you that I would do it again in a heartbeat. She was a wonderful horse, but you are my heart. There is no comparison." Colette hung the painting in their bedroom where she could see it every morning. It served as a reminder of the day her life changed, of the man who valued human dignity more than his own comfort, of the choice that had led to everything good in her life. When Sarah turned 18, a young cowboy from a neighboring ranch began courting her with Silas's grudging permission. Colette watched her daughter fall in love and remembered her own journey, the terror and despair that had preceded her joy. She made sure Sarah understood that she had choices, that her life was her own, that she should never settle for less than a love built on respect and partnership. Charles showed no interest in ranching, instead developing a passion for numbers and law. They sent him to school in Denver, proud of his ambitions even as they missed his presence on the ranch. Margaret, however, seemed born to follow in her father's footsteps. She had his gift with horses, his patience and intuition, and by the time she was 16, she was training alongside him, learning everything he could teach. On a warm evening in late summer, 25 years after that day in the trading post, Silas and Colette sat on their porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. Their hair showed silver now, their faces were lined with years of sun and laughter, but their hands were intertwined as they had been since that first kiss on New Year's Eve. "You ever think about how different your life could have been?" Colette asked, her head on his shoulder. "If you had walked past that trading post that day, or decided your horse was too valuable to trade." "No," Silas said simply, "because this is the only life I can imagine. Everything I have, everything I am, everything that matters, started the day I saw you refuse to be broken by circumstances that should have destroyed you. I did not save you, Colette. We saved each other." "You gave up your best horse," Colette reminded him, as she had done countless times over the years, the phrase becoming almost a ritual between them. "And got my whole heart in return," Silas finished, kissing her softly. "Best trade I ever made." From inside the house, they could hear Margaret talking to the horses in the barn, her voice carrying in the still evening air. Somewhere in Denver, Charles was building his own future. Sarah was probably walking with her young man, making plans of her own. The ranch they had built together thrived, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked side by side with love and determination. Colette thought about the girl she had been, terrified and bound in the back of a wagon, certain her life was over. She thought about the man who had seen her worth when others saw only commodity. She thought about the years of hard work and harder times, of celebrations and sorrows, of 3 children and a life built from nothing but determination and love. "I love you," she said quietly. "I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for 25 more, and for whatever time we are granted after that." "And I love you," Silas replied, tightening his arm around her. "My stubborn, beautiful, remarkable wife, my partner in all things, the best decision I ever made." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast New Mexico sky, the same stars Silas had written about in his letters all those years ago. The night breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and horse and home. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, and the horses stirred in their stalls, safe and content. This was their life, built on an act of kindness that had cost everything and gained everything. A pair of oxen had bought a young woman's bondage, but a cowboy's best horse had purchased her freedom. And in that freedom, they had both found something neither had dared to dream of: a love that endured, a family that thrived, and a home that would stand for generations to come. As they finally rose to go inside, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring, Colette looked back at the mountains one last time. She thought of all the lost and frightened people out there, all the ones who felt they had no choices, no hope, no future. She thought of the man beside her who had proven that one person's courage could change everything. "We should train Margaret to see what we see," she said suddenly. "To look for the people who need help, to understand that sometimes the best investment is in human dignity." Silas smiled in the darkness. "I think Margaret already knows that. We have taught her well. All of them, actually. They know what matters." They went inside together, closing the door on the night but not on the possibilities of tomorrow. The story that had begun with chains and ended with freedom would continue through their children, through the example they set, through the simple but profound truth that choosing kindness, even at great cost, was always the right choice. In the years to come, Margaret Sterling would indeed carry on her parents' legacy, running Sterling Horse Ranch with the same integrity and compassion her father had shown. She would become known not just for her skill with horses, but for her fairness in dealing with the hands who worked for her, for her willingness to give chances to those others had written off, for understanding that everyone deserved dignity and respect. Sarah's marriage produced 4 children who grew up hearing the story of how their grandfather had traded his best horse for their grandmother's freedom, and they carried that story with them as a reminder of what love really meant. Charles became a respected lawyer who specialized in advocating for those who could not afford representation, driven by his mother's stories of injustice and his father's example of standing up for what was right. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this warm summer evening in 1903, Silas and Colette Sterling simply held each other in the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created, grateful for every moment that had led them to this place. The trading post in Santa Fe where it had all begun was long gone, replaced by newer buildings as the town grew into a city. Farley's fate was unknown and unmourned. Mrs. Chen had passed peacefully in her sleep 5 years earlier, leaving her boarding house to a niece who ran it with the same warmth and wisdom. The buckskin mare named Dancer had lived out her days in comfort on a ranch somewhere, cared for by owners who never knew the sacrifice she represented. But the love born on that August day in 1878 endured, growing stronger with each passing year, each shared trial, each quiet moment of connection. It was a love built on the foundation of respect and choice, of seeing each other clearly and choosing again and again to build a life together. As Colette lay in bed that night, Silas's arm around her and his breathing deepening into sleep, she sent a silent prayer of thanks to whatever fate or fortune had put him in that trading post on the day when she needed saving. She thought of the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the man who had made it all possible not by rescuing her, but by giving her the freedom to rescue herself. Outside, the horses whickered softly in their stalls. The creek murmured its endless song. The mountains stood silent and eternal against the starlit sky. And in the small bedroom of a ranch house built with love and labor, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances slept peacefully, their hands still intertwined, their hearts still beating in rhythm, their story a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the enduring strength of love freely given and freely returned. The end of their beginning, and the beginning of a legacy that would ripple forward through generations. All because one cowboy had looked at a woman in chains and seen not property but a person, not a commodity but someone worthy of freedom, and had been willing to pay whatever price necessary to set her loose. In doing so, he had freed them both, and together they had built something far more valuable than any horse, any sum of money, any material possession. A life of meaning, purpose, and love that would echo long after they were gone.